We're just having a quick coffee before tee off. I'm in the great company of two fantastic recruitment experts, Neil Garrett and Simon Calfe, and we're going to talk about all things recruitment outsourcing today. Neil?
Neil Garrett. I've been around in the world of recruitment now for 18 years. Spent most of my time in the volume recruitment world and permanent recruitment world, but over the course of the last 6-7 years, I've had to set up a couple of RPOs, one MSP, and really get involved in how the whole candidate experience works across a very large FTSE 50 company.
Simon?
Been in recruitment for 16 plus years now, mainly in financial services and tech space, usually large corporates, and setting up whatever the recruitment function needs, really, from sort of small in-house teams, mixture of RPO, MSP models at various different times.
So I think the first topic I wanted to cover with you guys was the decision to outsource recruitment, which is quite a big decision to make, both looking at contract recruitment and perm recruitment. So how do you come about, in the times where you've outsourced, both of you, how do you come about that decision, and who do you need to engage within the company when you do that?
For me personally, and in most of my professional experience, the RPO MSP decision has usually been about retaining the graduate entry level strategy, retaining the executive pipeline, and it's the piece in the middle where typically you have the most volume, and that's the most transactional, and that's where it lends itself most favourably to a MSP or RPO. In terms of who you need to engage with, again, varies company by company. Some large companies have all sorts of structure and governance around the volume of spend, the amount of spend, what layers of approval you'd need to go through to actually get the approval and sign off. Some are more nimble and more agile, and it's more about my decision as the head of recruitment and the best fit strategy to sort of bring that on board. So it can be anything in between.
You've worked in situations where there's been a provider there,
Yep.
and you've also worked in situations where the company you've worked with has never engaged with an outsourced provider before.
Yep.
What are the key differences between those two situations?
So on the one situation where the provider was already in place, the RPO provider was already in place, was more about sort of what's the service actually doing, what's the value add, what are we paying for, because it was already a mature model. I was led to believe, a mature model in place and delivering against what the company wanted it to. The reality was, actually, you scratched beneath the veneer, and actually it wasn't. It'd been there, it got quite complacent, and actually there was lots of gaps in terms of where I felt the service needed to be. So that for me was more about managing that particular vendor and understanding what we were paying for and the service we were getting. So that was quite that was the situation there. When it's been something I've implemented, it's been more about the business case that I've been able to put together to try and educate and convince the business stakeholders that it was the right solution for that business.
Yeah.
So when they've never done it before, it is a case of demystifying what it is, what it brings, what it doesn't bring, the benefits you're going to get from the business, from the model, the benefits the business are going to get.
Neil, similar question to you. I know you've obviously experienced both as well. So when your decision to outsource to a provider, how does that come about, and what steps do you take to go through that journey?
I think one of the other key factors that potentially could be involved is time. So if you are in a position where you have everything is absolutely brand new and you have a very, very limited time in which to set up a recruitment function, the best option is always going to be an RPO, because they are going to be in a position to be able to mobilise incredibly quickly. I think the other key element in all of this is what does it do around value? Is it going to value add to the business? And the time factor that a potential RPO or MSP can save your either existing internal recruitment team, your stakeholders, hiring managers, etc., etc. It's very difficult to put a cost on their time. But if you can walk in with do you know what? There's 4 or 5 hours a week you're going to save. That's really, really relevant to most of the hiring managers out there, because 4 or 5 hours is so much delivery for them that I think one of the MSP scenarios that I've been involved in, starting from scratch, is more about time and more around creating an easy way of doing something, rather than having contractors coming in all over the place, there's God knows how many different hiring managers who deal with so many different agencies. The time just to get around every single one of those agencies to have the same conversation, and also just invoicing. If you just look at the admin that goes behind taking on contractors, the MSP scenario was very easy to sell into the relevant stakeholders because it's going to save us time. You do end up saving money, especially in the contractor space. And actually what we give back to the business is opportunities to deliver far more. Stakeholder-wise, in that situation, we had to start right at the top. There were levels of engagement starting with CEO, global HRD, and then working down to a number of exec level stakeholders, and we had to go to an exco in the end. But building a robust business case is just the key to that. Yeah. As long as you can show the level of benefit that's going to happen, no self-respecting exco is going to say, oh no, I'd like to waste time and I'd like to waste money.
And how long did it take you to do that whole engagement piece and decision to outsource?
So the engagement piece was about 6 to 8 weeks. It wasn't actually that difficult. I think the piece of work that then followed, which is, and we'll come on to it later, around how do you select your partner, and how do you then implement from a process perspective, that's the more difficult piece. But initial engagement, it shouldn't be that difficult, assuming you understand your business.
In terms of then the business case preparation, in terms of the return, you talked about time and time on process. What other elements are quite key? Things like cost or any other, compliance. Are those quite important to you when it comes to an MSP?
Cost was our biggest driver. The business is going through a massive efficiency program. So I was very lucky with the latest one because we had procurement involved, and therefore procurement did lots of lovely groundwork for me without me having to scab around for figures all over the place. But they could produce a fairly hefty saving that was going to happen. I think the time to actually prepare that is just based on the data that you can get hold of and how quickly you can get hold of it.
I've been in situations where cost wasn't actually the main driver of implementing MSP. Actually, it was more about the governance and the compliance.
Yeah.
So, working in financial services where you're in a regulated industry, the need to be compliant in terms of temporary labour laws and contractor regulations was essential.
Yeah.
And actually, it was unmanaged at the point where I introduced the MSP on several occasions actually, but the drivers have been the same. So actually, for me, the time bit was key, the quality bit was key, cost bit was less of a driver, but from a regulatory perspective it was the consolidated invoicing and the fact that we are legally compliant in terms of how we are recruiting, onboarding and then managing and offboarding sometimes the contractor workforce.
Yeah. And how about the actual engagement of contractors and finding the right skill sets within the right time frames? Is that a consideration or? Less
so, but that, for me, that's one of the ones that becomes one of the value adds you're able to demonstrate with an MSP once it's up and running.
Okay.
I think, in most cases where I've introduced an MSP, they've had confidence that they're doing it in the right way and they like the quality and calibre of the people they're getting. When you get your arms around it and you bring it through in a consolidated service, sometimes they it's that light bulb moment where they realise that actually we were wasting a lot of time doing it through X number of different agencies, and actually now we have this more channeled, more focused service and it's actually delivering much better outputs.
Same with you, Neil. Do you find the same thing in terms of the access to skills on the MSP side of things?
Yeah, once they are, as Simon said, once they have been going for X amount of time, because every time you're starting something from scratch, it's potentially a new industry. And Simon's works in financial services. I'm mainly retail based, but once they get to a point where they understand, in effect, their supply chain, rather than just the business, once they can get to a place where they have a reliable supply chain, the business will very quickly see that they're hitting SLAs, they're getting the right people really, really quickly who are coming in and delivering for those particular roles. So, yeah, it's a knock-on benefit. It's not something you can sell up front as this is going to happen. it will happen, but as you review each of your processes over, whether it be your quarterly or your monthly reviews, you will find levels of improvement generally happen.
Looking at both outsourced providers, how do you think either an MSP provider or an RPO provider, once you've engaged with them, can stay ahead of the game?
If I'm the key stakeholder, if it's the finance person or the procurement person, they need to be on the money there, they need to be present, they need to be available, they need to be demonstrating the value that they bring back. They need to be constantly looking to evolve the solution and the service as well. I think the worst experiences I've had is when it's an off-the-shelf service solution that comes in and that's it stays flat.
Yeah.
You know, I think businesses evolve and change all the time. That's what makes businesses successful. So any service provider within that framework needs to be doing the same thing around their service.
My personal observation on this is that some providers implement the service and that's it, job done, and keep it rolling and wait for the customer to initiate any change or any improvements to the service. And I feel that if you're managing the service, you should always be 2-3 steps ahead of your customer and always bringing ideas and suggestions to the table as to how that can be improved and where to take it. Say that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I think they need to be agile at every element of the service, you know, whether it is the service they're bringing, whether it's the commercials that underpin it. You know, things change, you know, businesses evolve. So I think the ability to stay ahead of that and to keep your service fresh and current is essential.
I think there's a level of immersion required from not only the account manager, but probably whatever their reporting line is, because levels of understanding the business and what's going on within the business will give them a better clue as to how they can improve it, how they can adjust, and how they can generally change the service that is overall delivered. So I think it's down to the company as well to let them become immersed.
Yeah.
Most of the businesses I've worked for have been high focus relationship businesses. So you have to develop the relationship with the individual hiring managers, you have to develop the relationship with the internal recruitment team, and the story of, oh, we are just an extra person in your recruitment team needs to become true rather than just some spiel on a company's website or something on a PowerPoint deck where they're presenting trying to get your business in the first place. And I think certainly within RPOs and MSPs that I've had an experience, there is a big part of what we do as the client to get them immersed in that whole scenario, get them into meetings, get them involved in other things that go on within the business, not just around recruitment. All of the stuff that as an internal recruitment function you get involved in.
Yeah.
Information is power at the end of the day.
Is it fair to say that alongside being immersed in the business that the provider's working for, they've got to stay removed enough to be able to challenge the status quo and challenge what's been said and how they've been asked to perform in essence, to improve things?
I understand your point of view, but if you look at within any business, the job of the senior managers within that business is to deliver new ideas, new ways of working, and other things that are going to deliver to the business. So that immersion, part of that will be, okay, so what can we do to improve? Because if I sit there every day and go, oh, do you know what, we're all right now, in 6 months' time I've fallen so far behind the market that, you know, we are potentially 2, 3, 4 years behind the curve in the world of recruitment. So it's an ever-changing world, and they will have to change with it.
But I think that's the complacency that you're referring to in terms of we're never all right now, are we?
I think one of the things that's key when you look to outsource the service is you bring in that industry expertise in, and that's not just what the service is providing to the client in that particular scenario. It's also leveraging the best practice and the market intelligence that a provider gets from their broader client base and from their industry knowledge and insight. So I think it's providing a service, it's evolving and changing that service, but equally it's bringing that external intelligence into the mix. So it's something we may not be thinking about it as the client right now, but we should be. So if other clients are doing things that are, you know, are better and more innovative, that's that sort of external piece. So for me, it's the solution account team, you know, the delivery people, and then to your point, it's their senior management structure that have oversight what that provider's doing across their broader client base and bringing that level of intellect to the table as well.
In terms of, you know, you both work with different types of providers. You work with smaller providers, bigger providers. Do you see any key differences between the type of provider you work with? your well-established, big engines, and your smaller, more niche type player?
Flexibility.
Yep,
Yeah.
totally.
Flexibility is very different. The provider that I used at my previous company, where we had a provider in the UK, was quite a small provider overall, however, incredibly willing to overcome and adapt to whatever situation we had. Had a massive amount of flexibility, whether it be around cost, whether it be around working practices, and really had a way of working with the overall business. When I went out to the US, we used one of the top 3 RPOs in the US, and they were far more structured, far more everything's on a bit of paper, and if it's not written down, we're not going to do it. So their flexibility decreased. Their cost went up and their flexibility decreased, which was quite interesting. Whereas what I was used to in the UK was always looking at the costs, always looking at delivering extra value while delivering that huge level of flexibility. But that's just my personal experience. Whatever you're trying to do as a business, your offering needs to have the end client in mind around what are they trying to achieve. And if you work together, you should be able to create a win-win scenario.
I echo that completely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's in a higher volume situation, some of the bigger, more established providers bring that plug and play confidence, and ability straight off the shelf. That's one of the things they bring. They've got the structure, they've got the resources, they've got the capacity, they've got the solutions. But equally, the better experience providers I've had have been when they've been smaller, agile, more nimble, more willing to work with you and engage with you in what the need is to be, the service is to be. So that's been the better for me.
Okay. So looking at recruitment agencies out there, as you know, there's a fair few in the UK. Any one of those agencies looking to now come into this space and offer a different type of service to their customers, what would be your recommendation to them?
Don't be scared of doing it. I think it's demystifying the MSP RPO world. I think at the end of the day, an agency out there might think their core business is bringing the skill sets that they have, understanding the market verticals that they operate in, and it's acting as that middleman in the agency world. It's not a huge leap to think that you can actually take that client relationship, evolve it and scale it into something where you're embedded further and you provide additional services. So I think it's not being afraid to do it. If you really know and understand your client really well, don't be put off by what is on the face of it a potentially different service. It's not. I think for me it's just ingratiating yourself deeper with that particular client and making yourselves even more indispensable. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing though from you is the relationship's key.
Absolutely.
It needs to start with a relationship that can happen and further discussions beyond that relationship. Neil, what would be your words of wisdom to anybody trying to establish themselves in this particular space?
I echo what Simon said pretty much, but I would say knowledge of your client, knowledge of where your client is trying to go with their whole recruitment practices, and a lot of businesses out there are all looking for some sort of USP. The world of recruitment is fairly simple. We in effect, we have a product and we go and sell it to somebody. Our product just happens to be people. But if you do it really well, then people will come back to you. So if you provide the product that people want in the way that they want it, at the cost that they want it, that's all that recruitment is. And it's not a complicated process. So don't make it complicated. Keep it simple, understand what your client wants, and then go out and deliver it and find out how that they want it delivered. Simple.
Neil, Simon, thank you very much for that. I think it's time to get to the first tee. Here we go.
Perfect. Let's go for it.